There's a text called the Enuma Elish, which I'm sure you know all about.
The creation
But just
story?
in case, yeah.
Yeah.
And just in case people watching don't know, it's
Sure.
it's about it's a text that was probably written at the end of the second millennium BCE in Akkadian, and it's the story of the ascendancy of Marduk, the god Marduk, over a Babylonian god. And it ends up, they call it a creation story because what he does after defeating Tiamat, the main antagonist, he creates heaven and earth, and organizes the cosmos and all these things. Okay, well, this text was recited every year at the New Year's festival in Babylonia. It was called the Akitu Festival. And it was such a big deal that when the Neo-Assyrian kings, when the Neo-Assyrian Empire was in power, the Neo-Assyrian king would actually come down to Babylonia, and Babylonia was their vassal, but they would come down and they would present themselves to the Marduk priesthood, take off their royal vestments. The priest would actually end up like slapping the king. Wow. I mean, it was a big deal, right?
It's almost what happened with the Pope later on with the Holy Roman Empire.
Interesting. Yeah. That's probably not a bad parallel. Not like a late historian. But yes, I think that's probably a good parallel. But that's how important the South and its traditions and its liturgies and its mythology were to everybody in Mesopotamia. Well, what we see is that at some point it's debated how this happened, but we end up seeing an Assyrian, under the Neo-Assyrian Empire, an Assyrian version of this Enuma Elish. And what's interesting about it is that the story stays essentially the same. Like the very beginning, because there's a slight problem with genealogies, they change a couple of things, very small things. But essentially all they do is go through and pull Marduk's name out and put Asher.
Is that what happened with Ishtar and Inanna? Are they the same deity?
They are. It's different. Ishtar would be like the Akkadian version of the Sumerian deity Inanna.
Gotcha.
But this was a very deliberate attempt to take this mythological text that was incredibly important, that everybody knew, that was foundational to the annual cycle, and to strip Marduk from it and replace it with Asher, their deity.
Wow.
And you might think, well, why the hell would they do that? I mean, like, if I've got a buddy that has said that that has a story about his grandfather who fought at Iwo Jima or something. I mean, what good would it do for me to take his story and say, well, not his grandfather, my grandfather, and just put his name in?
That is strange.
But that's looking at it through 21st century eyes, right? To them, simply having the name, simply having the story about that deity, by simply replacing one God's name for another, imbued it with power, right? And it made it a type of reality.
Wow.
Right. And it's obviously more complex than that, but
no, but what you're saying is so deep and important, because this is that scepter that they talk about, that power, that scepter that's yielded. Is these myths, these religions are very powerful. The most effective way of propaganda is getting people to believe in some sort of spiritual path that they will align themselves with. They'll go to war over it. They'll do whatever they have to do to progress that idea. So that's that's what we're dealing with.
And what's interesting, the reason that I bring all of that up, besides the fact that I think it's just hella cool, is when you think about that, you've got two Akkadian texts and two cultures, Mesopotamian cultures, north and the south, and one is utilizing that story, right, for its own purposes. So when you come to the Hebrew Bible and you see something like the flood story, and we don't have to go into all the details about this. If people are interested, David Carr, C-A-R-R, recently wrote a book called, I think it's The Formation of Genesis 1 through 11. Phenomenal read. Brilliant scholar.
Right.
But he talks about a lot of these like non-biblical precursors to these
Right.
parts of the primeval history. But if you look at the flood story in Genesis 6 through 11, one of the things that you notice is that not only does it pull from the like Atrahasis, what we see in Gilgamesh Tablet 11.
Yeah, there's that character in Gilgamesh who the god Ea, I think, tells him to make
Mhm.
an ark, and
That's
he
right.
survives a flood, and then he's
Yeah.
like talking about it.
And there's all kinds of details that surround this that are parallel. But just so everybody, I guess maybe just so everybody knows, the in the early second millennium, like the first half of the second millennium, a text was written, a literary text called Atrahasis, and Atrahasis is the name of the flood survivor. And so the people start, gods create humanity to do the work for the gods, which think about Genesis and the Garden of Eden.
Right.
I mean, it's not this isn't terribly difficult to reconcile.
Yeah.
But so that humanity starts to overpopulate, they become really noisy, and now Enlil can't sleep. And so he decides, I got to wipe all these people out, right? So he sends like a plague, and then he sends, sends several different things to decimate human population. And Ea, the god that you're talking about, tries to save humanity and does. He succeeds, and he tells people how to, escape from the things that Enlil is sending. Well, finally, Enlil gets fed up with it. And he says, all right, I know somebody's helping him. I don't know who. So all you gods swear that you won't help humanity when I do my next thing. And they all swear. So he says, all right, I'm going to send a flood. So Ea goes down to Atrahasis, and he stands next to this reed fence. And Atrahasis is standing next to the reed fence, and he says, reed fence, there's flood coming. Right? Build a boat, reed fence. Right? So he's not telling Atrahasis.
Wow, that's fascinating.
He's telling this reed fence. So
Uh,
so the same sort of story happens, right? They build this boat, bring on animals to keep things going. The gods send this flood. They float around on top for a while. When it comes to land, sending out the raven and all this stuff, and then offer a sacrifice at the end when they get off. So, I mean, you can see the story is like eerily similar.
yeah.
And
Another thing I noticed too is in the Enuma Elish, I think it's the Enuma Elish, correct me if I'm wrong, but they talk about in the beginning it was just primordial waters,
That's
Apsu
right.
and Tiamat.
Yep.
But in the Genesis, in the Old Testament, they don't say Apsu and Tiamat, but it
Right.
does say the primordial waters is the only thing there was.
And it says Tehom, and if you the Hebrew word for the deep, which is cognate with Tiamat.
Wow, I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
So I mean, if you just think about
That's why
Tehom,
I had to have you on, dude, to learn stuff like this.
yeah. I mean, like these are things that, I mean, of course, and if you're not, if you don't read it in the Hebrew, it's sort of hard to know that stuff. But Tehom, Tiamat, it's just they're cognates. And so what's happening? Not with just to sort of tie that together, I guess. What's happening? Actually, maybe I should say it this way. Let me tell one more story.
Yes.
One more story.
Please do.
So there is a story from the early second millennium called the Anzu myth. And the Anzu myth is the story about this Anzu bird, this ferocious divine bird. And he steals this thing called the Tablet of Destinies. And it's this tablet that whoever holds it controls reality, right? And he flies off into the mountains, and the gods they all fall apart, and certain people are asked to go out and fight against Anzu to get it back, and they all come back too scared. And finally this god Ninorta is convinced to go out, right? So he goes out, they have this fierce battle, he loses, and so he gets advice from Ea, again same deity, and Ea says, here's how you do it. We're going to trick Anzu for you to win. So what he does is they're fighting. The trick is that as they fight, Anzu gets tired and lowers his wings. Well, Ea tells him when he does that, take and cut off the pinions, as you know, his long feathers, off his wings. And what he'll do is he'll take the Tablet of Destinies and he'll say, feathers, return to me. Because everybody wants their pinions back, right? And when he does, when he says, feathers, return to me, take an arrow and shoot it. And the fletching that's made of feathers on the arrow will also be drawn to him and it'll kill him, right?
Wow.
Okay, so the reason that I told you that story is, again, even it's just not only because it's really cool.
It's super fascinating story.
The Enuma Elish, Marduk is the new Ninurta.
Oh,
Very intentionally is the new Ninurta.
right.
So, for example, and there are parallel things that you can see. One of them is like incredibly clear. There's a line in the Anzu myth where it says, let the feathers of Anzu blow back to the gods to declare, you know, your victory over Anzu.
Right.
Well, there's something called a blind motif when you're thinking about how two texts interact with each other. And the blind motif is when text B is borrowing something from text A, but when they borrow it in, it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't fit the context.
Yes.
But they're doing it to try to make a very direct connection between the two texts. So one of the blind motifs that shows up in Enuma Elish is when Marduk kills Tiamat, he cuts open her veins and the blood runs out. And it says, let the blood blow in the wind back to the gods.
Instead of the feathers, it's the blood.
Right. But blood doesn't blow in the wind, right?
So I see what you're saying. Now that's the blind motif.
That's right. That's the thing that doesn't make sense, but it's very clear.
It was written for the feathers, but they switched to blood, and now you can see that.
And now you can see that it doesn't make sense. That's exactly right. And there are a couple of those.
That's
like Marduk uses a net. That's Ninurta's weapon is a net, right? When Marduk uses a net, he's using it against Tiamat, which is the water deity. Like it doesn't really work. Anyway,
I see what you're saying.
So there's a direct connection between those two texts. But the thing that we want to camp on, and this will bring me back to Genesis, and I'm sorry I'm being so long-winded.
Oh no, this is great.
The thing that you want to pay attention to when you see two texts that are interacting with one another, and a later one that's sort of reusing something or doing something, you want to pay attention to where they're different. Those are the key points. So in the Enuma Elish, if you think back to the Anzu myth, Ninurta had to be convinced to go out and fight, and he had to actually fight the guy with the Tablet of Destinies, and he lost, and he had to win through trickery. Marduk volunteers to go. Wow. He's going to go fight Tiamat. She creates like a consort. Tiamat creates a consort named Kingu. And Kingu, she gives him the Tablet of Destinies. Well, if you read the story, Marduk approaches the battle. He's not even in the battle. He's just approaching, and Kingu falls out. He's done, defeated. Just by his approach, he's defeated. So the reader who knows the Anzu myth goes, my God, Ninurta, this amazing deity, this crazy powerful deity. I mean, he had to fight and fight and fight, and then ultimately had to trick. Marduk must be super, super powerful because just by approach, he doesn't even have to fight. So those are the things that we need to pay attention to, is where do they differ? Where are they reworking things? And so, okay, bringing it back to Genesis and the flood story. If you think about what Genesis or what Atrahasis does and what you see in the Gilgamesh epic, when Enlil sends the flood to decimate humanity or to kill humanity, it's because they're being really noisy and overpopulating and he can't sleep. And in the text, he's actually said to be evil for having done this evil thing that you did.
Right.
Well, if you think about Genesis 6, why does Yahweh send the flood? It's not because of overpopulation. It's not because it's because the people are evil.
Right.
And the text goes to great lengths to talk about that. Every thought of the imagination of their heart was only wicked continually. I mean, it's like,
Right.
and so it's what it's doing is the text is saying, no, it's not Enlil that sent it. It's Yahweh that sent the flood. And Enlil did it as a dick, right? Sent it being evil, but Yahweh did it not only justified in doing so, but absolutely had to do it because of how wicked humanity was. So
Right.
it's reutilizing, it's reworking the text to do something new as a polemic in many cases against these older traditions.